Good evening, everybody. Welcome to More Wild Talk, where we have neither more nor wild at the table. So today it is the Minzenmayer talk, which is why we did a little bit different on the background, did a little bit different on a table, because it's our show, and we get to do whatever we want.
No rules.
No rules. We're going to be talking to Darian about her job, the alternative out-of-school suspension program, but mainly about at-risk youth and just what we can do practically, what kids are doing these days, that kind of thing. But before we get there, before we talk to Darian about all of that, just a couple of announcements, a little bit of housekeeping. This Sunday, we're going to be continuing our whole disciple series. So far, Tracy has talked to us about thinking biblically, about godly character, about being a good steward. And this Sunday, I get to preach about living missionally. Super excited about that. If you watched the video that went up yesterday that I put on our Facebook page, you saw the bottom line, which is that our default mode as people who have access to the gospel should be to move towards those who do not have the gospel. And that's what it means to live missionally. We're going to be looking in Hebrews 13. We're going to be talking about going outside the camp, and we're going to be telling a lot of stories, which is what I'm most excited for this Sunday. If you haven't been back in a while, if you've never been to our church, we start at 9:30 a.m. Would love to have you there. You don't have to have seen the past ones to get something out of this, but you can find all of it at the church website. You can find all of that in the about. Next, we have the pumpkin patch, which is coming at the end of October. Buggy Bunch did this last year. Beginning of October. October 16th to 30th. So
Middle of October.
Middle of
okay,
October.
Sorry, we're both wrong.
Both wrong.
Team Minzenmayer.
That is October 16th to October 30th. So that's going to be a 2-week event. It is right here on our campus. There's going to be hundreds of pumpkins and thousands of people over those next 2 weeks. Great time to bring your family out. They have awesome picturesque moments. They're going to have 3 giant inflatables here. I heard there's going to be cotton candy and popcorn. There is just going to be a lot of family fun. There's a corn pit and like a hay bale thing, a tractor ride, fresh food. It's going to be a party. So they have family fun days. You're going to find all of that on our Facebook page later on this month, and there's just going to be an awesome time those 2 weeks. So make sure you put that on your calendar, October 16th to 30th. Come out and get a pumpkin. Bring your whole family. I think it's the only pumpkin patch in Indian River County. Definitely in Vero Beach, but maybe even in Indian River County. So definitely want to be there. And then finally, we don't plug this much on here because I'm usually not here, but if you haven't checked out our online ministry, we just launched it a few months ago. It's called Tethered. There's a t-shirt for it, this little T logo. This is our online approach, our hybrid approach is what we say, to following Jesus. So it is kind of flipping the model of the way we follow Jesus in this new world that's opening up to us, that is primarily living both digitally and in person. And so the way people find and interact with their community is going to be very similar to how they find and interact with the relationship with God, online and in person. So Tethered is designed to meet people in that space, creating community online and in person, tethering them together. So you can find more about Tethered, how to use it, the different things that we're doing, all at tethered.online. Not .com, .online. So you can find all that there. Okay. That's our housekeeping. A lot of information, just blasted it at you. I do want to say, before we jump in with Darian, and she's going to do pretty much the remainder of the talking, we are going to open this up for questions at the end.
Or throughout. If people have questions as I'm talking, go ahead and drop them in the chat or in the comment section.
Yeah, so anytime, but I'll remind you at the end to put your questions in. But anytime you have questions, put them in the comments. Darian said that she's going to take time to look at each of those questions and to respond directly to you. So you'll get a little notification later on that says, hey, Darian responded to your question, and you can go read her response. But anytime you have questions, drop those in the comments. We're not going to answer them in the video, but she's going to go back through and answer them, typing up answers. So anytime you have questions, put them in the comments below. All right, Darian, ALTOS, ALTOSS, ALTOS program. There's one here in Indian River County through our public high school, and you are the coordinator of the program.
Sure. So it's located at our high school, but it's actually funded by the agency I work for, which is Tykes and Teens, and they started this program in Martin County over 20 years ago, and the program was able to show through data that they were able to pull over the years that kids who attend the program are more likely to graduate high school. And so that was part of the reason they started the program was kids were getting suspended. So, you have maybe an in-school suspension where you go sit in like a classroom with a teacher and you have to be quiet all day and do your work. Out-of-school suspension were for higher offenses, and they would send you home and say, like you can't be on campus for X amount of days. But over time, and what we had seen in data of an out-of-school suspension is that kids were more likely to drop out of high school. So they started this program in Martin County. It's a partnership with the city of Stuart, and they operate at a youth center there. Here, we've been partnering with the Gifford Youth Center up until this year, where they moved us onto the Freshman Learning Center campus. So kids in 6th through 12th grade who are suspended out of school suspension, rather than doing an out of school suspension, they are assigned to come to the program that I coordinate. So that program is just it's a short-term thing, so that's probably one of the biggest questions I get is like, well, what's the difference between this and the alternative school? The alternative school is for a longer amount of time, so it's either the remainder of the semester, the remainder of the year, sometimes multiple years, just depending on what kind of accommodations the students need based on their behavior. But my program is anywhere from 2 or 3 to 10 days, and then that's it. Then they go back to their sending school. So I work with 6th through 12th graders on the daily basis that are coming in. We kind of have a revolving door. So on Monday, I might enroll 4 kids, and one of them might be there for 3 days. One of them might be there for 5 days. And then, they cycle in and out. And so Tuesday I might enroll 1 more kid. And so we have a kind of a revolving door. It's never the same kids every day. Or some days it is, but usually there's new people coming, and some kids it's their last day. So I serve those kids in the program. And we focus during the day on why are they there, but then also let's take this time to make sure you're getting your academics done, because typically when they were put out of school on suspension, it was their responsibility to get their work, and teachers weren't required to correspond with the students. So now we have a teacher on site. She reaches out to their sending school and to their teachers, asks for their work. She assists them, provides them support. Some of our students are ESC, which is exceptional student education, so they may have a 504, an IEP. She makes sure their accommodations are met for maybe a learning disability or behavior need. So
great. So you hinted at it, but I want to break down the two different questions here. The why kids are there, and then what you do with kids while they're there.
Okay.
So I'll start with the first one. People watching this, whenever they were younger, they may be getting suspended for a lot different reasons than kids are getting suspended for today.
Definitely.
So just, the revolving door, the overarching theme that you see in a lot of kids, what are the reasons kids are getting suspended for these days?
Yeah, so the top 2 that I definitely see would be drug use, and it's typically vaping, whether that's nicotine or THC. Nicotine is a lower level offense, but it is still something that they could get sent out of school for. And then THC, which would be a derivative of marijuana. So some kids could also pick up criminal charges for having that on campus. So whether it's vaping or having possession of marijuana or another substance on campus, marijuana is the most common. So that kind of falls under one umbrella as drug use or drug possession. And then the other would be fighting. So interpersonal conflict, a lot of times it's physical altercation or verbal altercations that escalate to a point where somebody has to step in. It causes a major disruption on campus, things like that.
Yeah. So, and I don't know if you know this, but how is that correlating with the Martin County? Are they getting a lot of the same offenses?
Yeah, it would be very similar, and I would expect it would be similar across the state, maybe even across the country.
Okay.
Because then we do have peppered in other things, vandalism, petty theft, things like that, which is one that I think is really important for our viewers to know about. There is a trend right now on TikTok, and I'm sure you've probably seen articles maybe, or your kids have talked about it if you have teens. It's definitely something to talk with them about. And I know you and I had talked about this. There's this trend going on called Devious Licks, and it's primarily middle and high school students participating in this. And it started out as, all in good fun maybe, but it is students are attempting to steal something from their school campus as a competition of who could steal something worth the highest value. So it started out like stealing soap out of the soap dispensers, or taking a roll of paper towels or toilet paper out of the bathroom. Okay. Something somebody might say is harmless, but then even at some of our own campuses here in town, I've heard of students stealing furniture or unbolting a bench from out front of the school and dragging it off with their vehicle. Yeah. Things like that are, intended in good fun. We have to look at youth for what they are, and that we know that their brains are not fully developed. They're impulsive, and they give into peer pressure. So knowing about those things and maybe talking to your student about them or your youth about them, to make sure they are aware that that's something that they could also pick up like a petty larceny charge for. So we don't want kids who, meaning well, fun, also now have a misdemeanor on their record.
Yeah. Okay, great. So the other question was, what are you doing with kids in the program? Now, I know there might be some confidential stuff. Yeah. I don't know, but what does a typical day look like? What are you really trying to focus on with these students that are at risk and, made a mistake or whatever? Yeah. So a lot of it, for me, so my part of it, there's the academic portion, like I mentioned. But then there's also, we do group activities. So sometimes it's all, they think they're playing Taboo, or they think they're playing, we have kind of these therapeutic style games where we'll play a game, and they think they're playing a game, where they've got to walk across a grid on a floor, and they've got to pick the right steps every time. But then we're able to debrief it with them and say, like, what is this like in your life? So everybody kind of knows the game of Taboo. You're trying to get somebody to understand something, then we can take away from that, like, what made this game hard? What times do you experience difficulty communicating in your life? Maybe it's with your parent, maybe it's with your peers, maybe it's with a boyfriend or girlfriend. So we're able to kind of unpack bigger meanings behind some of those games. And then we also have a circle at the end of the day, and we really focus on why they're there. So talking about what did you do to get you here? What could you have done differently? But also allowing the student time to hear their story, because a lot of times we can be extremely reactive as adults. We see what happened, but maybe there's more to it. So a lot of these students are experiencing trauma. And even, in the past 2 weeks, I've had this happen once. And then in my past few years of being with the program, I've had multiple times where I was being bullied. I didn't want to say something because that makes me a snitch. I didn't want to tell anybody I had been hurt or was being hurt by my peers. And so I've had instances where students have said that their parent told them that they need to go stand up for themselves. Or a lot of what I unpack with students is the use of the term self-defense. And they say, like, well, I was just defending myself. And I was like, well, you also threw punches in the fight, right? And they're like, yes, but I was defending myself. And so then I really break that down with them. Are you defending yourself physically, or are you defending your honor and your name? And kind of differentiating the two, and like, what are other ways you can defend your honor and your name? What are other ways before we get to a physical altercation, things like that. So that's just one example. Yeah. Say they're there for fighting, we would talk about that. If they're there for drug use, hey, what do your parents think about this? Do they know? Yeah, they know, or no, they don't know. And they would be, this is the response I would get from my parents. So really just trying to unpack, because there are so many layers to that onion. Behind every action that a student or really a human being takes, there's some sort of mode, or usually a reason behind that action. Yeah, I love it because it's a constructive method instead of just, kids make a mistake, kids do something they're not supposed to, they're lashing out, they are a product of their culture and their raising. Whatever the reason, they do it, and then oftentimes it's like, okay, we need to isolate you, the typical out of school suspension, where you can just, don't really learn anything. You don't get to debrief. You don't get to go any deeper. And so this method, it really is trying to get to a core problem. But what I love about it is it's giving these kids attention that many of them probably don't get. They probably don't get in their homes. They may not even get in the classrooms. They definitely don't get it amongst their peers. And so it's giving them, and they probably don't have access to like counseling or stuff either. I'm just assuming all of these things, but it's really giving them a space where we can address the real problem instead of just allowing it to fester.
Yeah, and I think two things with what you just said. One is that we strive to move away from punitive approaches and doing things that are punishment rather than consequence. So your action is going to have a consequence. That consequence might be something that is unfavorable to you, but it's not a punitive action like a punishment. We're not making them sit down and write 1,000 times, "I will not fight at school."
Yeah.
Because what are they learning from that? They're learning, "I will not fight at school," but what will I do at school? I don't know, maybe learn. The other thing is that what you said about unpacking trauma, and that a lot of these kids do not come from any sort of background like many of the people watching have. Or if you are a parent watching this, you're doing more than a lot of their parents are doing. And so one, really prime example, and I know I've talked to you about this, is that a lot of people probably saw in the news recently, there's one student that passed away in Gifford from a random shooting, and they're still trying to investigate. And then there was also about a month ago, a 13-year-old was arrested for attempted murder. And what really, for me, I'm able to look at that as a different lens, because I think a 13-year-old, I think that's probably someone who would fit the demographic of someone in my program. And so when I'm able to wrap my mind around that, I can show a little more empathy and think, man, I know some of these kids. And so when I saw this hit the news that a 13-year-old was attempted murder, I was even able to put a face to that. Like, I may know this kid. I may have had him in my program, or I may have had kids just like him that are maybe on that same track, unfortunately. What really was disheartening to me was getting on the sheriff's department posted about this, but then the comment section to me was horrendous, because it was talking about how, where are this kid's parents? His parents should be held accountable. His parents should go to jail instead of him because they're not keeping an eye on their kids. Well, and in my mind, I'm thinking, this kid doesn't have parents. If I'm looking at maybe envisioning a kid that I've worked with, this kid doesn't have parents, or if he does, they're extremely absent. Or, he has alienated himself from his parents for a reason, or he's following in his parents' footsteps. Yeah. So there's very few reasons for me to go and blame a parent. And maybe the parent is responsible, yes, for being absent. However, the child has then become a product of their environment, has no one around them that is a positive example.
Yeah. So what trends are you seeing? We've been talking a lot about like the behavior of kids, but what are some of the characteristic trends or cultural trends or family background trends that you're seeing in kids that are coming through your program?
I think a lot of fatherlessness, a lot of kids raising themselves. I see a lot of kids that are maybe if they're not, maybe they have good solid parents. I see a lot of children of abusers, of substance abusers. So they say, okay, well, my parents did drugs and that helped them. So maybe not cognitively, they're not thinking out loud. Like my parents did drugs, I'll do drugs, but it's a coping skill that they really don't know anything else. And that's probably the biggest one that I see is kids that just completely lack coping skills. Yeah. So they're angry, they're triggered by something, and they go off. And I've even had a lot of kids that will say they use the term that they blacked out. So like I got in a fight, somebody pushed me and I blacked out. I don't even remember what happened after that. And that can be a trauma response too. So those are just, some of them. Well,
again, you can put your comment or your questions in the comments or any comments that you have. Darian will respond. Last question. You can go pretty quick because we're running out of time here. But, people watching this can't volunteer at your program.
Right.
So practically, what can people watching this do with what's happening with this subject?
I think continue to raise up a generation of kids who know their parents and know their family, and trust adults, because I think that's one of the ways I'm able to quickest help or serve a student. So maybe they're only there for 3 days. I'm not getting into this deep dive counseling. We're not unpacking a lifetime of trauma in 3 days. But I'm there and I'm ready to listen, and that is what speaks magnitudes to them. So maybe it's friends of your child if you're a parent of youth, but just being an open ear, ready to listen, whether it's to your child or maybe your friend's child or just a teenager that you know.
Yeah. Well, Darian, thank you so much for being on the show. More Wild Talk, otherwise known as the Minzenmayer Show. It's been great just learning. And again, if you have any questions, comments, put those in. Darian will respond. Thanks for watching. Hopefully we'll see you on Sunday. If not, we'll see you right back here next week. Y'all have a good week.